You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better. Put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Deku Meets South Park. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Faff on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Ken sat towards the back of the bus, having filed out of the written examination hall ahead of the rest. He was looking out the window at the great expanse of concrete when a familiar voice caught his attention. Well, if it isn't Satomu and Kaoru. Poking his head up above the seats, Ken looked across the aisle and called out. Katomon. His voice coming out muffled as always, though this time from behind a scarf as opposed to his cold weather parka. Kenny. His fat best friend yelped in surprise. Sure enough, from the seats Katomon had been addressing, a massive fluff of red hair poked up. Oh, hey Kenny. Kaoru waved. I didn't know if you'd make it. Kenny waved a gloved hand back, before shifting over and shimmying across the aisle, taking the seat next to the one Katomon had taken. We all made a promise, dude, if I'm going to be the one to break it. Off-handedly giving his chubby friend a fist bump, Kenny tilted his head at Kaoru, in the gesture he used to show he was smiling widely. With his aversion to being seen, over the years he'd picked up various habits when it came to body language. What are the odds we're all in the same practical? I thought they'd have split us up. Sutamu said, scratching his neck in a thoughtful motion. Middle school, that's probably the reason. Kaoru added, ever the reasonable one. Despite wildly different circumstances taking them to different middle schools, the four had stayed friends throughout. The distance between those of them who had moved not being great enough to push them apart. Kaoru's attendance of a hero prep school. Sutamu going to a school deeper in the mountains, closer to his family's new farm. Ken himself going to an inner-city middle school closer to the orphanage. Katnoman being the only one of them who remained in Sasupaku to attend their local middle school. It's to stop us cooperating, right? Ken asked his clever Jewish friend. Before Kaoru could answer though, the tubby Katomon Bullrock had interjected. As if I'd need you guys' help to pass this thing. Kaoru's response was practically second nature. As if we'd help you, fat boy. F you, Kai. With the profanity began an old routine, electricity sparked across Katomon's head, his own quirk zapping him. The other three friends chuckled, and sitting here on the bus, Ken almost felt like he was back in that quiet little mountain town. School days, school days. He started, an old song they used to sing at the bus stop coming to mind. With an ironic smile, the other three boys picked up the refrain with no sense of pitch or tune. Teacher's golden rule days. God damn it, shut the F up you stupid F extras. 2 rows in front of them a spiky-haired blonde kid with mean-looking red eyes stood up and span around to glare at them. Don't tell me to shut the F up you whiny little PP. Katomon naturally was the first to rise to the aggression, his sudden outburst of more unique profanity causing a wave of electricity to spark around him. Ken could give him credit, when things like this happened Katomon always opted to absorb the static himself, rather than let it loose. Well, maybe not always, but 6 times out of 10 wasn't a bad lifetime record. I'll kill you out there you bstrd. Oh yeah. Katomon spat back. Well, I'll make you eat your parents. Sit down. An adult voice bellowed from the front of the bus, and as they turned their attention to the speaker, what they saw was a human wall of concrete. The Prohero Cementas, and one of the faculty at UA was staring them down with unmoving impassivity. His flat gray face offering no room for debate. With a grumble and some deathly stares, the four of them and the red-eyed boy returned to their seats, facing forwards and out of each other's eye line. Even though their fat friend had been the one to flare up, the other three of them had tensed, all ready to unify and verbally humiliate the stranger. "I'm so going to zap that guy in the butt." Ken heard his fat friend grouse under his breath. With a nudge, Ken lowered his sunglasses slightly and muttered back, "Dude, if you do that, they'll dock you points." There was a slight subsidence in Katamon's bloodthirst, but that was quickly subsumed by a glint that Ken had seen in his friend many times. It was a look he had learned to fear and hate in equal amounts. Though there was a part of him that relished those dark schemes. Ken's willingness to do whatever as long as it was a distraction, and Bulrog's inability to let things lie made them something of a bad pair. That didn't stop it being fun though. Only if I do it on purpose. He heard the chubby vulgarity machine whisper before they fell into a little silence and the bus began to trundle off towards the exam site. "Did you guys say you were from the same middle school?" Another voice, thankfully not one so aggressive as the kid from up front, asked. The kid leaning across the aisle to talk to them had a metamorphic quirk, one which caused Ken to have to look twice before he realized what the situation was. In place of a face, the boy, or who he assumed was a boy, had a speech bubble for a head. Currently etched upon which was a large wavering question mark. "Dude, what's wrong with your face?" And leave it to Katamon to immediately insult the metamorph. "It's his quirk, D-Wad." Kairu bit out with a roll of the eyes. "Don't be AF but. Sorry about that, it's best to ignore him." Sutamu put in, leaning forward to meet the gaze of the speech bubble examinee. Ever the mediator between their two friends, he continued. "We're from the same town, went to the same elementary, but different middle schools." "Oh, right. I was wondering because I was here with some of my middle school friends who applied, and we got split up. I'm a little nervous not having anyone to talk to." The kid seemed excitable, the friendly sort, but was clearly laboring under the weight of some anxious jitters. Sutamu shrugged casually and spoke. "Don't worry bro, I'm sure you'll kick butt. What's your quirk, if you don't mind me asking?" Kairu asked with a smile, offering quite naturally to bring the kid into friendly conversation. From where the speech bubble had previously displayed a question mark, now a line-drawn smiley face appeared. "It's called comic, I can cause, well, basically if I shout onomatopoeia, I can cause those affects in the world. Like, pow or kaboom or whatever?" Sutamu asked. With the appearance of a thumbs up on his bubble, the kid replied. "Yeah. Can't use it too much though or it gives me a sore throat." Kairu nodded and smiled enthusiastically. "That's really cool, man." Putting into the talk, Ken himself added. "Yeah, you're sure to pass." With a side-to-side head bob, the otherwise featureless boy adequately conveyed some level of humble acceptance, before asking. "What are your guys' quirks?" "Fat butt here," Kairu began. "Hey!" Katomon burst out. Only for their Jewish friend to continue as if nothing had interrupted him. "Causes electric shocks whenever he swears." Wiggling his fingers like a magician, Sutamu answered. "I can basically control industrial machinery with my mind. I can fire lasers from my eyes." With a slight activation of his quirk, Kairu's eyes glowed with yellow light for a brief second. "And Ken." Then suddenly he remembered why that wasn't something they talked about, outside of Katomon being a sumbag. "Well, I have a quirk." Ken drew their attention to him, the one place it had been avoiding despite him having the focus all of a sudden. "Yeah." Sutamu didn't sound as sure as someone should when answering such a simple question. Unfortunately, with Ken, it was anything but simple. Clearly keen to redirect the conversation, Kairu waved his hands in a mimicry of kung fu and spoke. "He knows all sorts of martial arts and stuff too, can kick our asses that's for sure. You can say it you guys." Though his tone wasn't usually as petty as it became when Katomon ripped on him, he was still as blunt as a bulldozer. "We all know Ken doesn't have a quirk. I have a quirk douchebag. Raising his hands in relaxed dismissal, Ken looked between them all. It was a topic that had come up before, and it didn't bother him. Not as much as it should perhaps, maybe if he really didn't have a quirk, it would be less bearable. But long ago he'd figured out that it would take a lot of work for people to believe him, and even then, the nature of his quirk might still prevent it. Your meth head parents were quirkless, your Yakuza wannabe brother is quirkless, face it you poor piece of SHT. The insults didn't sting, coming from Katamon it usually took something especially vitriolic or petty to get a proper reaction from him. Even so, that didn't mean he'd ignore it. Though Ken did notice that the prick hadn't brought up his sister, which meant Katamon had at least learned his lesson from the last time. Eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses, Ken felt his fists clench involuntarily as he stared down his supposed friend. F you, fat boy. Looking at Katamon, Sutomu butted in to stop their back and forth before it could flare up. Knock it off, dude, plus. Brushing his dark straggly hair to the side, Sutomu creased his mouth into a half-smile and half-joked. Like, we've seen Kenny do some ratchet SHT. I wouldn't do half the stuff he does, that's got to be some kind of power. Not for the first time, Ken outright said it. I told you, I have a quirk. I can't die. The awkwardness was palpable, but it wasn't something he was unused to. Part of him even thought if he said it enough, one day they'd believe him. What? It was the speech bubble kid who spoke up, only after a drawn-out nervous silence. Upon his face a constellation of question marks bobbed up and down. The ginger among them shook his head and definitively changed the subject. It's complicated. What was your name by the way? Fukudashi Manga. Nice to meet you all. Taking the exit from their spiky topic, Fukudashi gave a tilt of the head Ken was used to employing himself. Humble smile. Likewise, Fukudashi-san. Not for the first time Ken marveled at how much his friend had changed over the years, even if his eventual metamorphosis into an approachable likable everyman was nothing but predictable. I'm Hachikage Sutomu, this is Bunraku Kairu, that's Katamon Bulrog, and he's Kurosarada Ken. A big smiley face planted itself on Fukudashi's speech bubble as he replied, the jitters completely gone. Awesome, good luck, I hope we all get in. We will, no problem. His face hidden by a scarf, sunglasses, and a prodigious wide-brimmed hat, Ken gave Manga a thumbs up to show his support. The kid, who had seemed nervous without his friends to talk to had bounced back after some friendly chatting. It was just like Kyra to have noticed that and offered him an olive branch, despite Katamon's behavior being a natural deterrent to them all making new friends. But in the long run, with Kyra's perceptiveness, Sutomu's everyday friendliness, his own weirdness, and Katamon as a social defense system, maybe they made the perfect quartet. Just a shame they couldn't help each other out in the exam. No, each one of them wanted to get in on their own merit, and not one wanted to risk losing points for cheating. Dropping a cement pillar to start the exam was certainly one way to kick things off. Ken sprinted away from the start line, immediately veering into a side street to get away from the start area. He would miss out on the abundance of robots soon to arrive there, but the last thing he wanted to be doing was directly competing for points. When he neared the exit of the alley, a one-pointer rolled into view. With finely trained reflexes Ken leapt up and twisted around the robot. The machine was nowhere near quick enough, and without even pausing for breath Ken had netted his first point, a fistful of wires withdrawing from the lower back weak point. Most people wouldn't plug a bare hand into live circuitry, but not only was he not most people, he had gloves. They weren't insulated, the exam requirements prohibiting most support items, but they were better than nothing. Skidding out into the adjacent street, Ken took in the sight of 3 robots beelining for the alley, clearly programmed with a map of the battleground, or at least some detection system to funnel them towards where students were. All one-pointers, he would have to be fast, they weren't worth the effort if he couldn't crush them now and find more bountiful targets. Not slowing, moving into the guard of the closest. Weak point under the chin, a little panel which nimble fingers opened. As the metal fists came down on him the wires were already his. All impetus for movement stopped in the robot, just in time for him to duck out from under the clenching arms. Lowering down, Ken pushed forward, using the wheeled machine as a battering ram for the other closing droid. His next target immediately went off balance and hit the ground. Relinquishing his grip, Ken hopped back before immediately diving forward. Not caught in the immediate chaos of the two hunks of junk falling, he was able to handspring over them, crouch down by the still live bot and rip out some key wiring. Having planned his next movement even as he was initiating the last, Ken rolled to the side, not even having to look to see what the final target was doing. Its haphazard swipe was easy pickings for his next attack. This time, maybe he'd show off for the cameras. Just a little. Hopping up, kicking into a higher leap with the aid of the collapsed droids, he executed a crane kick to the camera faceplate of the one-pointer. Electronics were crushed under the boot and the robot went spiraling backwards. After it hit the ground, Ken confirmed the takedown by tearing out some key wires. 4 points, nearly 1 minute. At this rate he'd have around 40 by the end. Not good enough. As those thoughts went through his head he was already moving. One hand came up to resettle his hat. Bigger targets, more points, was all his mind could focus on. It was like a freaking video game. Into a building, two-pointer idling by some stairs, a little prize waiting for those examinees who were intrepid enough to go hunting. Bigger robot, enclosed space, 2 points. Still not worth his time. Ken growled under his scarf, the harsh sound emerging from him in a shout as he sprang towards the machine. Target acquired. A technologically processed voice screeched from the machine, but Ken was already circling round it. The two-pointer was raised off the ground by several sturdy legs, with drill-like arms spinning towards him as it rotated on its chassis. Pushing off the wall to gain extra force, Ken slid under the robot's frame, eyes scanning for those promised weak points. It was then he realized his mistake. While sunglasses indoors looked cool, they weren't the best for picking out small details. Rolling over, Ken narrowly avoided the stomping insectoid legs of the robot, bringing a hand up as he did so to flick his shades down. Sharp blue eyes roved over the machine. This time when a leg came down towards him, Ken kicked his own up as if he were about to start performing prone bicycle kicks. His boots caught the leg and twisted it to the side. It wasn't enough to topple the thing, as it had more limbs to compensate its balance. The intent, however, was for Ken to gain greater access to the main body of the droid. His legs wrapped around the metal and Ken pulled his torso up off the ground in a hanging sit-up. Face to face with the droid he lashed out with one arm, tangling his fingers into the exposed wiring that peeked out from beneath the neck joint. Hard to reach for anyone without exceptional aim, or as he had, close proximity. As the robot began to crash to the ground, Ken drew one of his looped legs back and kicked off the knee joint. He twisted in the air, landing with arms spread just beyond the threshold of a door deeper into the building. It had taken him too much time, he scolded himself, but there was one thing he could also count on. He now knew where the weak points were likely to be on 2 of the 3 types of robots. Close to 8 minutes later Ken had downed considerably more robots, but as he veered around a corner into another alleyway. Ever pushing his search for more targets in every direction around the battle center, he crashed into something. There was a feminine scream, and Ken went pinwheeling, taking both him and the person he'd run into to the ground in an ungainly heap. He could have reacted quicker, if there had been anything for him to react to. Instead he seemed to have slammed into absolutely nothing. Said nothing, let out another scream as Ken pushed himself to his feet, or at the very least tried to. His hands pushed down onto a squishy something and a smooth, well-toned something else. He was dislodged from the tangle by a decidedly not smooth, not squishy knee jamming itself into his nether region. Curling up in pain he rolled over and off of this invisible person. Both of them lay there for a second, groaning in mixed pain and embarrassment. The F? He muffled out from behind his orange scarf. You grabbed my melons. The shrill voice shouted in his ear. The position of the voice was level with him on the ground, but he heard it rise in orientation as the girl let out a yell and he heard her fall back down. Why have you got your tips out? He barked back, locking the pain away and scrambling to his knees. Don't even start, it's my quirk, okay? Her tone was heated, even without a face or any body language to convey it. Her voice did more than enough. Okay. He shot back, spreading his hands in a placating gesture. Sorry, are you alright? No. Her answer was twisted through with pain, both emotional and physical. No doubt the stress of the exam taking its toll. My leg, it really hurts. I haven't exactly been going easy here, Anne. Trying not to sound impatient, Ken got an idea in his head. Chill out, we're still on a clock here, let's not waste time. Waste time? Thanks to you I sure as hell won't be able to bag any more villain bots. He heard a hand smack the ground next to where her voice was coming from, a flat palm frustratedly hitting out. Ken took in a breath and was about to voice his plan when a loud klaxon blared across the battle center. The signal that there was 1 minute remaining. SHT. He breathed, before refocusing on his new companion and asking. Can you walk? Sort of. He heard her heavy breaths rise in height, the girl standing up. With a nod he half turned towards the exit to the alley. Follow me, I'll set them up, you knock them down. What? Her immediate response sounded disbelieving, but quite quickly as the sound of destruction erupted in the distance, she followed up. Really? Yeah, let's go. Jerking a thumb back from where he'd come from, Ken started on a brisk run. As he turned and sped down the street, he could hear the awkward stumbling and pained hisses following after him. So far Ken had avoided the 3-pointers, opting for the far easier pickings of 1s and 2s. Droids that not only tended to move in packs but were far more efficient points-wise, since there were also more of them. He'd also avoided the 3s because they had missiles. He didn't fancy taking his chances there with only the clothes on his back. If his luck held, the 3-pointer he'd passed up just a few moments ago would still be lurking. Sure enough, in the back lot of one of the hollow buildings it was sitting there, idling like the hulking tank it was. The segmented treads, the raised chassis, the pointed weapon-laden arms, and the glinting faceplate attached to the neck armature. The main thing that had kept him away, however, was how deceptively fast these things were. No sooner had he gotten the drop on 1 or 2, had they let out a refrain of target acquired, and immediately fired a barrage of ordnance at him. Resigning himself to the reasoning that these were probably designed for people with high damage quirks to show off, Ken had been avoiding them. Until now. A few seconds later he heard the huffing and puffing of an invisible girl join him. Casting a look over his shoulder to where he assumed she was, Ken said. On me, flanked to the right, closer to the wall. Are you crazy? Her words hit his back because as soon as he'd finished, the faceless examinee had swung around the corner into the concrete yard. No sooner had he appeared did he hear the telltale phrase. Target acquired. What he had surmised so far, was that the 1- and 2-point robots were slower to adapt, making it advisable for him to rush them. Getting inside their guard to where they couldn't react as quickly. Seeing as they were robots their articulation was also limited, making it far more advantageous to get into close combat. Where the 3-pointers differed however, was that they were designed to prevent that. You either had to move at inhuman speeds, or attack from afar. Or, as Ken had realized on their run here, attack with a coordinated assault. Instead of charging in, Ken sprinted parallel to the machine. Rockets fired off from its primary launchers. The explosives spiraled through the air, not precise at all, but then they didn't need to be. Heat and shards of concrete scarred up his back even as he made it fairly clear of the impact zone. Just as he was about to duke back and play keep away with this thing, he heard something that set his nerves on fire. A triplicate chorus of target acquired. A pair of 1-pointers cycling into the yard from behind him, and a 2-pointer skittering out from the darkness of the building. Shifting 1 foot back, Ken took a sidelong stance, keeping both the 1s and the 3 in clear line of sight. This left the 2-pointer obscured by the bulk of the missile-happy tankbot, but since it was primarily a melee combatant, he didn't pay it too much mind yet. He waited, listening to the three-pointer. A muffled hiss, followed by a deep whirring sound and then twin clunks. As the sound of reloading played out, Ken backpedaled towards the tank, even as the unicycle ones came at him. Left to right he danced from side to side and back into the arms of the three. Right in between the aim of its two missile arms, Ken jumped straight up, twirling his body in a pirouette to reduce his shape as much as possible. Simultaneously he pushed his jump further back into the tank bot, bringing both arms down on top of one of the launchers. The firing mechanisms had already activated, and with both arms gripping he could force the aim of the right rocket to strike the ground between the twin one-pointers. As the smaller robots were scattered and broken, the three-pointer let loose its second explosive. Whoever had programmed these things, Ken thought, hadn't had the good grace to give them a self-preservation instinct. He bent his back into the launcher he'd grappled, and if he was honest, Ken could say that this was a new one. The sensation of a rocket burning across your face certainly had a unique kind of pain that accompanied it. Before he could blot out the pain and shove it away with the rest of the aches and bruises he'd garnered over the exam, however, he was treated to a new threat. The two-pointer advancing on him. Ken's body was so contorted from dodging the missile, that he had no room to avoid the incoming drill arms. Their sharp spinning pain promising to be another new sensation to add to his macabre collection. Then the three-pointer lost all balance and dropped backwards. Over the sound of his lower back crunching, he could hear the triumphant shout of the invisible girl. From the fistful of wires hanging in the air over its head, Ken could see where his last-minute save had come from. Slipping down to the ground off the motionless tankbot, he rolled himself under the two-pointer and in a motion he'd gotten to practice a lot so far, ripped out the undercarriage wire in a flash. He kept on rolling as the machine died a grinding electrical death, and within seconds was out from under the crushing machine. Hell yeah! Take that, you metal piece of, oh my god, you're on fire. His fellow examinee flipped the SWCH from overjoyed to frightfully concerned as soon as, assumedly, she turned her eyes on him. "Oh F!" he yelled, not having noticed the fire that had caught on his hat from the cheek-kissing missile. Just one of the many downsides of his quirk, sometimes when he was in that combat mindset his pain sense just completely switched off. Though switching wasn't quite the way he thought of it, it was more like a slow dialing down of his awareness of pain. The longer he fought the more he forgot he was supposed to feel it. But death couldn't stop him, why the hell would pain do anything? Tearing the hat off and turning away from his combat partner, Ken swatted the fires off, before returning the singed article to his head. The less he showed of himself, the less likely people were to realize just how badly hurt he was. That was part of the reason for his style, at least, the other part he would have to talk about in therapy. Such a shame he didn't have a therapist really, they'd make a fortune off him. Time is up. Another klaxon sounded out across the battle center, signifying that their 10 minutes had ended, their chance was done. Now all they had to do was hope. Two teenagers heaved exhausted breaths standing there, letting the fact that it was all over wash over them. After a few seconds of catching his breath, Ken looked to where he thought the girl was and offered an apologetic shrug. "Sorry I grabbed your melons." He'd been here less than 15 minutes, and someone had already had to come to his rescue. Walking into the campus, Izuku had tripped on his own feet and been sent straight to the floor without so much as a consoling pat on the back. To his luck and embarrassment, a girl, with chestnut brown hair framing a round hopeful face, had saved him. She had smiled, waved her hands at him, explained her quirk maybe. He couldn't even fully recall that frighteningly friendly encounter. It had been 15 minutes and it was already too much. A pretty girl with an amazing quirk, saving him from inevitable death. Okay, he was exaggerating. Maybe that fall would only have injured him permanently. Was he being overly pessimistic? Izuku didn't think so, but then again, he didn't exactly have the most unbiased perspective on the matter. He'd watched her go, skirt fluttering in the cool breeze. She had a skip to her step, a relaxed, happy, bounce. Now he sat in the assembly hall feeling like he was made out of lead. Lead, interestingly, is one of the less bouncy metals. If he remembered rightly. He might not be though, seeing as how his stomach was also doing somersaults, his nerves and anxieties apparently having decided to take up tap dancing earlier. This was awful. Why had All Might chosen him? Where was his confidence, the strength he'd been feeling grow day by day? He had worked so hard, never stopping, never relenting. Why was he so afraid now? The answer was quite simple, this was it. If he failed here, his hero career would stop before it could even start. Could he be exaggerating again? There were other hero schools in Japan, Sei, Ketsubutsu, Shiketsu even. Despite that, there was still only one UA. Trying to snap himself out of his thoughts, Midoriya refocused on the assembly hall around him. Honestly, the orientation was passing in a haze. The faces of everyone around him, even Bakugou, his childhood antagonist, seemed to fade away. All his attention was consolidated on the exam. Unfortunately for Midoriya, when he got like this he tended to mumble. The tension unlocking any inhibitions he had about speaking his mind, every thought coming out of his mouth in a slightly deranged murmur. He could have died when a tall examinee wearing glasses had called him out on it, the intimidating boy waving a demanding finger around like a spear. Jabbing it in Izuku's direction when his mumbling had interrupted the examinee's question about the test. 3, technically 4, types of robots. Each type similar in design, though not uniform, and each being worth a different number of points based on their strength. Droids worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. The images of the things set the hair on the back of his neck standing. Even the 1-point robots looked like they could crush him. Then there was the 0-pointer, the arena trap. A robot so apparently destructive and powerful that it was worth no points because the intention was that no potential student, fresh out of middle school, would be strong or crazy enough to attack it. It was more of a disaster to be avoided than an enemy to be conquered. That didn't stop Bakugou Katsuki from looking like he'd scented BLD, however. More to get away from Katsuki than anything, Midoriya shuffled out of the exam hall as silently and quickly as he could. In doing so, hopefully he would escape the attention of that tall boy who had called him out as well. Directed through the school halls by signs posted on the walls, Izuku was able to collect his exam ID slip. On it he could see which hall he would be in for the written portion, and then when and which battle center he would be in. Given the potential intake for UA, the examinees had been split up into 4 different groups, which had subsequently been split again to accommodate for as many students being tested in one day as possible. Groups ranged from 1 to 4, and were then subdivided from A through H. With about 30 examinees to each. This put 2 groups to a battle center, so while one group would have their practicals in the morning, the other half would take the written. He was Group 1A, which meant he would be sitting his written test first, then taking the bus to Center 1 after lunch. With so many students being tested on just the first day of entrance exams, Izuku was starting to feel just a little queasy. With so many people, would he even stand a chance? No matter how much All Might had been training him, no matter how much he wanted it, no matter the quirk he had been given. It just felt too impossible. "Hey, are you doing okay?" The person addressing him hadn't exactly snuck up on him, in fact she had moved to stand right in front of him to prevent that. And now that he thought about it, yes, she had been waving her hand in front of his face with a worried expression. Oh no, had he been mumbling again? "Yeah, you were. Do you need to sit down?" she said, and Izuku realized he'd been speaking out loud. Slapping his hands over his mouth to reassert control over himself, he bowed, perhaps unnecessarily, and spoke. No, sorry, I'm fine, I'm just really nervous." The girl inserted, cutting off his train of thought before it could once again derail. With her mostly black school uniform, and long dark hair, Midoriya might have been intimidated by her sheer appearance alone. Several seemingly innocuous things about her went towards offsetting that impression however. One was her bubblegum pink beret, the other were her uneven bangs which brushed her forehead in a deliberately unkempt fashion, and lastly was her open and friendly expression. Admittedly tinged with concern, her sharp face fit the kind of features that one might expect on either a high-powered businesswoman or a news anchor. Yeah. He replied dumbly, swallowing down the lump that had caught in his throat even before such a pretty girl took the time to talk to him. Do you want me to give you some advice? She offered, hands folded in front of her. As she stood there, another thing leapt out about her to Izuku. It was her eyes. They seemed to almost lack a physical presence. As if they were just projections of light rather than actual orbs. What tipped him off were the colors that danced behind her retinas. Like her eyes had no one color and were instead filled with flashes of neon from all over the visible spectrum. Around the pupils the rest was even slightly luminous, giving her gaze a somewhat magnetic quality. Yes, please. He answered simply. Was she hero course, business course? Something about her hinted that she would succeed just as highly on either. Her easy confidence and subtle authority were a trait Izuku could only ever dream of having. Though he hoped All Might would never catch him thinking like that. Focus on one thing at a time. You've got your written exam coming up, of which the first section is general education. So, math, science, Japanese. Then it's the respective written sections, so the 3 questions for whatever course you're applying to. Then a break. Then practical exam if you're applying to be a hero. It was information they all had, but she laid it out so simply, waiting for him to nod that he understood before she continued. If you think about all of that at once you're going to panic. So just focus on what's next, one thing at a time. It's hard to stop worrying completely. Why not make sure the anxiety you do have is pointed in a productive direction? Taking a deep breath, Izuku processed the advice. Maybe it was the concept itself, maybe it was her presence alone, but he suddenly felt a lot more at ease. Not calm, not by a long shot, but certainly more settled. Okay. Thank you. He tried to say more but couldn't come up with anything. Great. Good luck. She smiled a beaming grin, and then turned and headed off into the crowd. Which made 2 pretty girls who'd saved his life today. One thing at a time. A long monotonous stretch of minutes later, Midoriya was sat at a small desk, inside a different hall of UA's main building. Pro heroes stood at the front, though he supposed that he should think of them more as teachers. About 5 of them had divided up a stack of exam papers and were now walking the aisles of desks and passing them out. Despite trying not to get distracted again, Izuku couldn't help but be surprised he didn't immediately recognize more of the teachers. The only 2 he could identify were Snipe and Midnight. Snipe's distinct gas mask and guns looking as iconic as ever, even in such an academic setting. Midnight's provocative costume, with its skin-tight. One thing at a time, he scolded himself. Looking for too long at Midnight's costume was begging for trouble, like looking at the sun. To his annoyance, Midoriya couldn't identify the other 3 heroes in the room. A lanky man with long dark hair, nothing particularly eye-catching as part of his costume. Then a balding man in bright green shirt and slacks. Maybe not all the people working here were heroes, janitorial staff perhaps. Then the balding man's heft hand swiveled around and Izuku noticed something very strange, and most certainly quirk-related. Where the hand should end in fingers and knuckles and such, instead it looked to almost grow into a puppet. Fabric and felt comprising a roughly humanoid figure with a striped, white-red hat, a violet shirt, and still nothing was coming to Midoriya's mind. He thought he knew almost every well-known hero in Japan, and most of the lesser-known ones as well. Even so, something about a puppet tugged at his mind. A news story several years back, it was possible, but the connection still wasn't being made. A slap of paper on wood snapped his attention back to his desk, and the other pro-hero who was already moving along. A large man with a bright white apron and chef's hat, an array of cooking implements tucked into several belts. He wore no mask, his open friendly face bristling with a beard. Izuku could have smacked himself for not recognizing the cafeteria hero, chef. It was even emblazoned on his apron for crying out loud. That at least made it 3 out of 5 heroes he could identify. One thing at a time. Closing his eyes and taking a deep breath, Midoriya focused entirely on doing absolutely nothing until the exam formally began. Many seconds ticked by, before finally all the teachers were back at the front of the hall. You have 1 hour and 45 minutes. Starting now. The dark-haired teacher said, raising his hand and bringing it down on a large digital clock. Immediately a timer started, and the sound of dozens of exam papers being turned over filled the room. Mind-numbing general education questions came first, plenty of multiple choices, and the sort of questions that had only one right answer. It was relieving in a way, for things to be so black and white. That ended however when he made it to the part of his exam that truly mattered. Each course had 3 essay questions, the business, support, and general education tracks all having specialized papers. A part of him was curious as to what they were, but as a hero applicant he only had 3 before him. In your opinion, what does it mean to be a hero? Refer to heroes you admire, aspects of the hero profession you see as valuable, and what type of hero you would seek to become. Describe an important historical event as it relates to heroics. This can be an event that involved heroes, contributed to the development of hero society, or otherwise influenced the current state of the world. Discuss the positive and negative attributes of either the Hero Public Safety Commission, or of wider hero society. Those 3 questions, each at the head of their own sheaf of paper, stared Midoriya in the face. He had breezed his way through the general education portion of the test, confident in his scores if not amazingly so. He didn't need top marks there. Generally, if students did well on the practical section of the exam, the general education tests would be considered unimportant unless they were abysmal. The only factor those scores had is if the teachers were considering someone for the general education course. The thought suddenly put a rock in Izuku's stomach. Should he really have rushed that portion of the exam? If he failed the practical, failed the general test, then he wouldn't even make it into the regular course in UA. It didn't matter now, he'd already filled out the questions, and time was running out. The 3 written heroics questions were now before him, and he had to decide where to start. Hand aching from all the writing, Izuku left the hall feeling somewhat lighter. Those essay questions had felt so easy. He'd run out of space on every single one, making sure to stop at the word limit, but not being able to stop himself from adding footnotes and references for the more obscure bits of information he'd referred to. A big part of him whispered that it had been too easy, but as Izuku made his way towards the bus pickup area, he consoled himself. If there was one small thing he could allow, it was that he had been preparing for this his whole life. Maybe he hadn't realized it exactly, maybe he hadn't physically been training, but his mind traveled back to a certain stack of notebooks. Years worth of academic prep, hero theory, quirk analysis, significant villain attacks. After taking some time to himself to reflect, and also visiting the little hero's room, Midoriya turned his mind to focus on the next thing. One step at a time, easy does it. Climbing onto the bus, Midoriya immediately cast his eyes around for the girl with the pink beret, or the gravity quirk girl he'd met this morning. To his slight disappointment, they were both indisposed. The pink beret girl chatting animatedly with a blonde examinee next to her in a back row. He couldn't see the gravity girl anywhere, but she had been quite short, so maybe he was just missing her, or maybe she was yet to get on the bus and might even sit next to him. Crushing his roving mind before he could get his hopes up for nothing, Midoriya took a seat by a window and stared out of it. All he had left now was the practical exam. An exam he'd only trained for a total of 10 months, an exam he would be taking with a quirk he had never used before. A thought rotated back to the forefront of his mind. There was something in him, the power of All Might's quirk, one for all. If only he could have had time to figure out how it worked. Thinking hard, Izuku thought back on all the times he'd seen All Might use it. Yagi called it his muscle form, it granted him speed, strength, reflexes, God knows what else. But despite all his studying of heroes over the years, Midoriya couldn't say he had any idea how All Might used his quirk. He just seemed to do it, like it was natural. "Hi, my name's Scott Mawkinson, what's your name?" The boy who sat down next to him wasn't Asian. For now, that's all Izuku could tell, mostly because he'd been blindsided by the sudden opening up of conversation. He would never be able to understand people like this, who could just start talking to strangers. It was practically a superpower itself. There was something about how the boy spoke though, maybe it was his grasp of the language. Either way, it was hard for Izuku to understand what he was saying. Luckily, the phrase was one of those universal phrases that can be identified even when spoken by someone with no fluency. Like asking where the nearest train station was. I am Midoriya Izuku. He gave in stammered response, his anxiety at being spoken to suddenly making him turn his answer into a question. The American, or was he British, maybe Australian? Boy put back. Cool. Wait, my name is Mockinson Scott, sorry, I'm new to Japan. There was something indeterminably hard to understand about how the other boy was talking. Was it his fluency? His accent? Confusedly Midoriya answered generically, all he could make out about what the boy had said being his name again. Right? Yeah, I'm from America. His wide happy eyes looked at Izuku from beneath a wisp of brown hair, a little curl that dangled down on his pale forehead. He answered again after a short pause. The only word Izuku could decipher being America. I'm pretty sure I've got the language down, it's just the name stuff I'm having trouble with. Izuku finally couldn't take it anymore. Why were there so many S's in this boy's speech? He cringed visibly as he broached the subject. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble figuring out what you're saying. Is it my Japanese? My Japanese is pretty good, I thought. The foreigner put a thoughtful hand to his chin, which didn't help to translate any of the words he'd just said. Except for maybe Japanese. He'd definitely said that at least once. Maybe. Some of your pronunciation. It was so unbearably awkward. His whole life Izuku had avoided correcting people, avoided causing any discomfort whatsoever. And now, as he was sat on the bus to the practical, more stressed than he'd ever been, holding a power within him that he barely understood, this had to happen. Something so mundane, so everyday, so awkward. Oh, that might be my slight speech impediment, you may not have noticed, but I have a little bit of a lisp. A dozen words made their way out of the boy's mouth, along with a not unnoticeable amount of spittle. It didn't take the final word Mockinson-san had said for it to click with Midoriya. He leaned back slightly, out of the firing range of the boy's saliva, and just nodded. Yeah. With a friendly shrug the American grinned back at him. Yeah, it's not usually a problem, but you know, what can you do? Are you from America? Izuku wasn't proud to say that the new voice almost made him leap out of the window. A head of sunshine blonde hair had poked up from the seat in front of him. Two bright shining blue eyes were looking between the two of them. Midoriya couldn't take this, so many new people, all so quick to start talking to strangers, how could this get any worse? Karo, hello there. But then a girl had to pop up from the other seat in front of them and see him visibly freaking out. Yep, that's me. Mockinson chimed with a satisfied smile. A look of pure amazement came across the blonde's face, like he'd been told he'd just won the lottery. Oh, gee whiz. I went to America when I was little. Have you ever been to this place called Bennigan's? Why did everyone have to be so collected, so excited, so not like him? It was maddening. I've been to a Bennigan's before, yeah. Replied his seat neighbor with a bob of the head. The blonde's eyes went wide as saucers as he cooed. There's more than one. Wow, what a country. Did you come over from America just for the exam? The girl had dark green hair just like him, but unlike him she was so calm and cool it made him marvel at her sheer presence. Not just for this one, but my stepmom is Japanese, and my dad just moved out here to live with her. So, I'm visiting as well. How was everyone understanding what Mockinson was saying? It took an extra 10 seconds for Midoriya to catch up to what the American was talking about. And I thought I came a long way. The blonde laughed. I'm from Sasupaku, it's in Yamanashi Prefecture. Her face expressionless, but not unfriendly, the girl added. I'm from Aichi, felt like a long journey as well. With a vigorous nod of the head, the blonde boy set his hair flopping all over the place. I know, I'm really nervous. Later Izuku would wonder how he ever had such a thought, but right now, sitting where he was amazed by just how normal these people were. It was not going well. Today he'd been saved, shouted at, saved again, then maybe flirted with by a member of the same SEC, then shouted at again, then upstaged, embarrassed, and on top of all that he hadn't even managed a single solitary point. The robots were so fast, so tough, so frightening. Every time he approached one his nerves would cause him to delay, and given how many examinees there were it wouldn't be too long before someone else destroyed it. It was all going to be for nothing, he would fail and be nothing more than a bystander in other people's legends. Years from now he would sit on a park bench, an old and lonely man, and lament about how he could have been the next All Might. Yagi-sensei would see the mistake he'd made, take back all for one, and then. Then something even worse started to happen, something that made all his impotent whining and panicking seem insignificant. The girl with the gravity quirk, the one who'd helped him at the very beginning of the day, was in danger. The zero-pointer towered over her, except it wasn't just striding forwards, now it was falling. Arms as big as several train carriages cutting waves into the nearby skyscrapers. The sky was becoming nothing more than dust and rubble, each segment of concrete enough to decapitate a normal person. She was running, but given how gigantic the zero-pointer was she wouldn't make it. Once again, mirroring the action that had put him in this position in the first place, Izuku was moving before he could think. His mind took in the girl, the distance he had to cross, and finally the gaping hole in the Titan's chest. A wave of energy raced down his body as he neared her. Every part of him reacting without thinking, even his quirk. Hold on. He shouted, voice straining from the exertion as he unceremoniously grabbed her up in his arms and hunkered down. Wait, what? Her own shout was strewn to the winds as the sound of heaving metal crashed down towards them. Izuku didn't so much jump as he did kick the earth. Even as he and his charge left the ground, pain followed with him faster than gravity. Izuku screamed as they soared through the air, whipping through the hole in the middle of the robot's chest and flying out the other side. Through the pain and agony splintering his legs, Izuku's happiness was short-lived as he realized he didn't exactly have a landing strategy. Even as his cries of pain turned into ones of panic, the girl in his arms remained if not calm then at least coherent. I've got us. She cheered as Izuku felt his whole body bounce as if he'd ridden his bike over a pothole. Suddenly they weren't falling, and the girl was holding him more than he was her. The green-haired boy couldn't help but smile and laugh, even though the tears and crushing agony. As they coasted down to the ground in a relaxed arc, Izuku's tears had not stopped falling. Tears of joy, of pain, of the sheer worry about being pressed so close to a girl he'd only just met. Upon landing he was unable to support himself as she let go of her quirk, and he crashed to the floor, legs twisted out behind him. Izuku smiled looking up at her, the two of them having saved each other. It was exciting, again even in spite of the pain. It was the first moment he had felt like an actual superhero, the first time he felt like All Might had made the right choice. This is where true heroism happens, he thought, in that split-second moment where you had to make a choice, and without granting it permission your body answered for you. Then she vomited all over him. I'm sorry. She wheezed through strands of bile. My quirk. I've never used it so much, it was really, and I've been using it the whole exam, and, oh no, watch out. Another bucket of puke was this time thankfully directed onto the ground instead of onto his torso. It's not a problem. Izuku cried, his body cringing from the sticky shirt that now clung to him. He tried not to think about the chunks as he waved his hands. I broke my legs. He started rambling, words marching out of his mouth like a disorderly battalion of soldiers. It's not like you're the only one whose quirk affects them negatively, you've got nothing to apologize for, if anything I should apologize since I put you in this position. You saved me. She exclaimed indignantly. Before realizing something and hiding her face behind her hands, then further hiding from him as she turned away. Anxiety rising in a flash, Izuku blurted out, "What's the matter?" What had he done this time? Did he really look so bad? Well, with his broken legs maybe. He deliberately kept his eyes away from them, fearing he'd pass out if he saw the damage. Her answer was obvious. "I've got puke all over my face, I got it all over you, oh my god, this is the worst." "It's fine, really," he cried, tears uncontrollable at this point. Gingerly she turned her wide watery eyes back to him. Eyes that got even wider as she took in his injuries. "Your legs. Help. We need a nurse, quickly." Her voice rose and rose in alarm. Which is when Izuku finally looked at his legs. "So, who makes the cut, in your opinion?" Sitting back in her chair, the mossy-haired girl, Tokage, asked her, eyes twinkling with delight. Momo hummed in consideration, though really it was to hide her panic. The sheer power she'd seen on display, rivaled only by the quick thinking and battlefield expertise of some of the other examinees. The strangely behaved blonde boy from Battleground 1. Yeah. He was crazy, like, maybe literally crazy. Tokage grinned, showing off sharp animalistic teeth. He lacks proper control of his quirk though, which put other students in danger. Momo replied, eyes distant yet focused as she replayed the events in her mind. That sort of thing can be taught though, it makes me wonder what his quirk is. Tokage mulled over, rocking back and forth with built-up excitement. Gah! I just want to be down there. Her hands raised up, Tokage gripped at her hair. What do you two think? Who else will pass? Turning her gaze to the right, Momo offered to bring the two boys in on the conversation. At first there was no response, but eventually Todoroki spoke up, his heterochromatic eyes narrowing in deep thought. The two violent ones from ground 2. Yes, despite their attitude and little scuffle, I'm certain they will make it in on power alone. She nodded at his suggestion, having been transfixed by the short and explosive argument that took place in ground 2. Momo wasn't sure what had been said, given that they didn't exactly have clear audio for the battlefields, but things had looked heated between the blonde bomber and the overweight boy. I think the technokinetic will come out with the high score. Tokage interjected. The lizard-like girl's excitement was still buzzing in her voice, but the consideration she spoke with belied her fierce intellect. He had the perfect quirk for the exam, all he had to do was touch a robot and it fell apart. From my memory, I believe the first-place student received some sort of accolade. Momo asked, something in her research on UA and her plain old general knowledge nudging her towards a realization. For their part the others looked blank. What do you think, Shirakabe-san? Tokage asked, leaning far forward to look at the silent boy who sat on Todoroki's other side. There was a long moment of consideration, a scholarly pause for thought. Then Shirakabe let out a devilish chuckle, one that sent a shiver down Momo's spine. Throughout the boy's eyes had been moving like those of a hawk. From their initial introduction she had been told that Shirakabe harbored a mind like a quantum computer. He would have to, in order to have scored a perfect 100 on every one of the recommendation tests. With a finger upraised, the boy shouted clear and loud. Timmy! The three of them blinked. Shirakabe Tamamitsu just laughed, spinning his wheelchair around and rolling towards the entrance. At the crossroads of the mock industrial harbor, with the final alarm still echoing in the streets, Kendo sank to her knees heaving a breath. Despite her cradling her wounded hands, and despite Heidi and Kohi disentangling themselves from thorny vines, the speedster next to her still managed to say. Wow! Don't we all look like real Sususa, superheroes? Ack! I'm alive! Tumbling to the floor in a heap, the sparky blonde Kohi cried out suddenly in surprise. Hands placed together as if in prayer, the examinee from whose head those saving vines had emerged opined. I must apologize, my vines do not make the most comfortable landing pad. Finishing her apology with a bow, she straightened up and offered everyone a sparkling smile. "Don't worry," Heidi cheered, standing up and picking strands of plant matter from her uniform. As she did so, she also picked Kohi up off the floor, where he stood next to her on shaky legs. "We're okay, right? I'm alive." The blonde shouted again, his eyes wildly searching around the area as if to confirm he hadn't found himself in the afterlife. With a nod, Heidi smiled towards her. "We both are, thanks to Kendo. I appreciate the helping hand at Itsuka-chan." As Kendo cringed in humility and equal parts embarrassment at the pun, she couldn't help but match a smile as bright as the vine-haired girl. Still, she was smiling through the pain that coursed up her arms. "And here I thought I was the comedian." The speedster who had been her own saving grace quipped, with a comical tilt of his head. His gym uniform, with bright yellow stripes and a red undertone, was something of an eyesore, but then again, what middle school gym uniform wasn't? Casually the boy leant on his crutches, but still offered Kendo an arm to assist her in standing. Waving him off, Itsuka opted instead for continuing to catch her breath. "Sorry, I get it from my mom," Heidi admitted, bunching up her shoulders in embarrassment. "Hey, it's fine with me." The comedian responded with a wink at the other female member of their little gathering. She merely blinked back at him, the mass of greenery having fully detached itself to leave her with a modest head of emerald locks, even tying itself off into the shape of a cross upon her forehead. Not taking the lack of laughter as any indication not to keep on going, the boy shot another wink at Kendo, saying, "As long as these puns don't get out of hand." There was an awkward silence, no one, not even Heidi, seemingly in the right mindset. Not that the jokes were laugh-out-loud funny either. Looking into the middle distance, seemingly talking to an invisible audience somewhere, the comedian concluded. "You know they say sarcasm is the lowest form of comedy, those PP people haven't heard my puns." Another judgmental silence, wherein everyone, even the hyperactive Kohi, stared at their compatriot with a disbelieving kind of wonder. Wow, what a terrific audience. The final statement, of all things, sent Kendo into a bout of uncontrollable giggles. The others followed in varying degrees, Heidi shaking with silent chuckles, Kohi laughing in sporadic bursts, and the vine girl hiding a giggle behind her hand. The super-speed jokester merely accepted the response with an open-mouth grin, eyes drifting lazily off to the side to look at no one in particular. With casual effortlessness, he added, "Anyway, my name's Jimmy, and boy is it great to meet such fantastic people." "Hi, Jimmy-san." She smiled back, getting to her feet finally and offering a small bow. Given her martial arts upbringing and the fact he had saved her twice in the exam, the formality came somewhat naturally to her. "I'm Kendo Itsuka." "I'm Heidi." The ashy-haired brunette waved, thumbing some dust and debris from her smiley face hair clip. "Shiozaki Ibara, a pleasure to greet you." The other green-haired girl said, another polite bow with clasped hands offered to them all. When their gaze turned on him as one, instead of answer, Kohi jolted as if stuck with a cattle prod and yelped. "Ack!" A crunch of shoes on broken concrete heralded the arrival of another examinee. Though with where he'd emerged from, it was clear this was the figure Kohi had reacted to. Even if the pressure of introducing himself was likely enough to set the neurotic boy off. With an exhausted drone, a dull monotone voice interjected. "He's Kohi Kohei. Kuregu." The blonde in question shouted out, trying to dart over to his boyfriend, but instead stumbling and having to grab onto Heidi for balance. Kendo, along with the other examinees, turned to regard the newcomer. In doing so they saw a mostly shirtless, red-faced, Ginza Kuregu. His hat fallen askew and the black hair beneath looking dusty and bedraggled, the flat-toned boy looked by far the worse for wear of them all. "Sup?" was his singular response, as if he wasn't dressed half in rags and practically dragging himself along. "You look, Itsuka began, but couldn't find a polite way to say, like SHT+, she did not quite have Ginza's bluntness to help her voice the fact. "I am fine." With the way he pronounced every word like it was a physical hurdle, it did not seem that way. By now though he had made his way to stand by Kohi, who latched onto him. Rather than the blonde being the one who needed propping up however, it seemed Kuregu was the one who required some sort of reassurance. The two leant on each other, a perfect balance of two young men who were about to fall apart but couldn't because the other one was in the way. When the two boys clasped hands, Kendo and Heidi were as one when they mouthed the words, "so cute." Mainly to each other from across the space. "VERYYYY, RUSSS Sue. Are you sure?" Genii voiced, and despite his stutter causing him to take some considerable time to say it, there was an unspoken pact between everyone that they would not interrupt. Something about the humorous guy made her think that interrupting him might be a bad idea, just an imperceptible intensity and intention he had when speaking, as if he was going to get through every sentence no matter what. "Yeah." Ginza responded, eyes bloodshot and listless. Turning to take in the destruction around them, Genii asked. "I guess that's the day over then." "Yeah." Heidi said, scratching her chin and looking around. "I suppose all we have to do now is wait. We will all pass, I can feel it." Ibra encouraged, her light and airy voice feeling comforting even outside of her kind words. As one they all started a slow walk back towards the starting area, having finally gathered up enough stamina to do so. "I sure hope so." Genii added, shooting Kendo a wide smile and a thumbs up. It was after they had all been through the nurse's station, receiving instant treatment from the retired pro-hero recovery girl, that the impromptu group found themselves standing together again. Sun beating down on the grass quad of UA campus's main walk, it felt so strange for it all to be over just like that. "So, what's everyone doing after this?" Heidi asked, following a peaceful span of silence. As one they all made non-committal shrugs, none of them seemingly having much to do with the rest of the day. A few of them mentioned something about their parents waiting for a text, or having to catch a train at some point, but no one was immediately pressed. With this, the brightly smiling Aizawa Heidi made a suggestion. "Anyone want to go get some okonomiyaki?" The response was heartfelt and immediate, and the flock of newfound friends headed off and away from UA. Stomachs rumbling and smiles on their faces. "Butters?" Amagarin had sat up in his infirmary bed, the flat pillow and thin sheets beneath him feeling papery and crisp. He'd been sat there, gazing morosely out the window with no one else currently in the room to tell him what had happened since he lost lucidity. So, to be interrupted by that all-too-familiar voice was perhaps the most frightening thing he could have imagined. In the doorway between the main patient area and the nurse's office stood a short rotund boy. His shrewd round face was scrunched up in anger and bald confusion. Covering his mousy brown hair was a light blue hat with yellow puffball, and bunched up under his arms was a red coat. The grip on his jacket had tightened upon spying Butters, and now with one pudgy finger the boy pointed directly at him. Recoiling, the blonde examinee exclaimed, also in shock. "Bh but Bulrog?" "Butters." Siadaman Bulrog retorted, but before they could get caught in a loop, the fat kid shook his head and demanded. "What are you doing here?" His shrill whiny voice rising in alarm. "He's recovering, you little devil." A reedy woman's voice called out from within the nurse's office. "I've dismissed you, so if you're not going to keep quiet you can leave." The old lady who emerged from the door had a face that was at once kindly, and also rather shriveled. Her wrinkles and age had somewhat caused her face to squint in on itself, not an entirely ugly appearance, rather sweet in a way. Still, it gave her a perhaps unintentionally intense expression as default. Which actually seemed to suit her rather well, Butters thought, as she stomped into the infirmary and whacked her syringe-shaped cane on the ground in front of Bulrog. "You've gone and eaten all my gummies, you're lucky I don't charge you." All right. Bulrog waved his hands and scooted away from her. "I'll be right with you, dear. Just need to finish up a few things." She turned to Butters, giving him a warm smile before adding. "If this one gives you any trouble just call, and I'll come and throw him out if I need to." "Crazy old bee." Seataman muttered under his breath once the nurse had secluded herself back inside the office. As soon as the door had fully closed however, he rounded on Butters. You better not have tried out for the hero course, but... His voice was intense, but still kept at a low enough volume to not draw the nurse's attention. With the more well-used profanity, Bullrog's quirk gave off a lesser charge, little sparks leaping up and slapping the boy in his face but causing nothing more than a flinch. First Sudam, Kai, and Kenny, now you. Jolting in realization Butters asked. Those guys were here today as well. Yeah, assholes were in my battle center kill stealing all the robots. The profane middle schooler shook his head vigorously, as if to dislodge a particularly clingy thought. It doesn't make sense, why would you all want to be heroes, don't you realize how dangerous it is? Bullrog's tone took on a pleading, beseeching whine. Kenny doesn't have a quirk, Sudam should be on the support course, Jews can't be heroes, and you, after rambling his own deluded thoughts to himself, Bullrog jabbed another finger at Butters. You're going to get someone killed. Unable to properly respond, knowing that what Seataman said was far from the truth, but still grazed past his deepest fears and the events of the day, Butters could only stutter an answer. And no, you don't, that's not true. I can be a hero. Oh, Butters. Seataman feigned sympathy, adopting the closest thing he could approximate to a genuine expression of concern. It's honorable that you want to live up to my legacy, but you don't have a quirk as sweet and cool as me. Despite the obvious disingenuous tone, Butters couldn't help but flash back to the exam center, to the toppling zero-pointer. To the silhouette of another examinee, directly in the path of its crushing weight. He shrank visibly in his seat. Seataman, incapable of sympathy, continued his speech. How many times have I told you, it's best you just lock yourself away to avoid causing destruction. Butters' mind went to the days upon days spent grounded, confined to his room because he had lost control. Hey, look at me pal. Involuntarily Butters' eyes drifted up to meet Bullrog's. Lips pinched up and beady eyes staring seriously, Seataman tried to look reassuring and inspiring, but all that time practicing in the mirror didn't seem like it had helped any. You can run my fan club. Plus, I might need someone to do my accounts once I achieve my dream and make. The fat boy almost salivated as his mind drifted to a number he'd spent many years chasing, one that Butters knew himself from all the time Seataman had confided in him. 1 billion yen. That mockery of an uplifting expression falling away from his face, a look Butters personally knew Bullrog had tried to ape off of All Might and Endeavor, his childhood tormentor turned to leave. Casting one final parting phrase over his shoulder, Seataman chuckled. And hey, if you go nuts and become a villain, you can be my nemesis or something. Thanks, Bullrog. He mumbled, eyes downcast. Butters heard the door open and close, but all he could do was fixate on his hands, clasped over his lap. Yeah well, can't be helped. You don't know what it's like having a quirk like this, it doesn't work on any clothes. I can't turn it off, it's a real pain in my butt. The invisible girl's good-natured tirade brought her voice down off the carcass of the 3 pointers, and right beside where he himself stood. Ken was usually an expert at picking up on body language, but that didn't help him here, since all he had was the sound of her light cheery voice. Seems really useful though, bet you took down a shitload of robots. He shrugged, stuffing his gloved hands into the pockets of his gym jacket. Plus, you can sneak out to the movies without anyone noticing. Perhaps the girl realized he had nothing to pick up on with regards to her face or body language, because she offered several sounds of understanding which ended with a genuine chuckle. I wish. She giggled. My mom and dad have gotten real smart since the first few times I pulled that off. She gave a contented hum and then continued. We should head back to the starting area, I guess. My name's Hagakure Turu by the way, but you can call me Turu, I don't like it when people get all formal. Flipping from one area of conversation to another, Ken started to get a wider picture of who Hagakure, or Turu, was. Even though she was invisible he felt like he was starting to see her. Friendly, talkative, quick to flare up. Sure. I'm Kurosarita Ken, but just call me Kenny, everyone does. He replied, turning and beginning their walk back to the starting area. So, Kenny, what's your quirk? Is it some kind of super reflexes or something? You were like Kacha. And then Fuzish, super ninja style. He could definitely see her, the karate stances, the head duck, the arm swoop. A lot of it was conveyed through her voice, how it moved with her ducking and making the fight sounds, but most of it just made sense. This was the kind of person she was. I can't die. Ha! Her excitement and action didn't die, but it hit such a stumbling block that he could hear her actually stop on their walk. For his part he chuckled. My quirk isn't anything special, doesn't really help me out much. He supplied. It was an easier answer really, plus when making a first impression he didn't want to sidetrack their nice conversation into something so wild. Quirks could do many things, they behaved almost like magic. They could do a great deal, but not that. At least as far as the rest of the world was willing to believe. By answering that his quirk was nothing special, he also played on a real social discomfort people had around quirks. It was a strange juxtaposition between rampant curiosity about others and a massive self-consciousness about one's own that made it a weird topic. It was so often the first port of call for getting to know someone. So, what's your quirk? Had usurped the age-old questions of, what do you do? And, what music do you like? Among others as instinctive icebreakers. But given that quirks could be so varied and given that a percentage of people didn't have one, it meant that the question hit just as many roadblocks as those old favorites. To the question, what do you do? For example, someone might answer that they had a wonderful, fulfilling job that paid well, or they might say they shoveled SHT out back of a garbage dump, or that they were unemployed. The range of answers was so wide that it made the topic of conversation a minefield. Yet that awkwardness could not circumvent the curiosity. What's your quirk was a question Kenny had several answers for, the honest one, I can't die. The comfortable one, it's nothing special. And the one for days when he'd just had enough, mind your own business. Toru was nice enough that he afforded her the former too, though admittedly he had to back off of the truth. Answering that his quirk was immortality was like answering that your job was king of the moon. To segue further away from the explanation that he might have made for someone he'd known for longer, Ken joked. But I've trained at martial arts for my whole life. Whoa, that's so cool. Toru cheered, before giving a gasp of realization. Ken felt a dainty finger prod him quite undaintily in the chest as she crowed. So, you are a super ninja. Ken shrugged as if to say, what can you do, and they both rounded the corner into the main thoroughfare. He let out a low whistle as the destruction came into view. DMN, guess I was right to steer clear of the big open areas. Yeah, oh god, I don't want to think what would have happened if I'd got caught in the collateral. Toru added from his side, her voice sobered somewhat at the realization of what some stray rubble or an errant missile could have done. Guess playing this like a ninja worked out for us both, huh? He added as they picked their way towards the entrance. Other students were emerging from side streets, and even more had found their way back to the start line already. There was a medical tent set up, and Ken could even see some stretchers with occupants laying atop them. Aha! Oh, I hope no one got badly hurt. Toru added, the nervous wringing of hands present in her expressive voice. Humming in consideration, Kenny measured a response. I'm sure they've got the best nurses. They'd have to, I don't think the school would have many students if they didn't. Once I've got my clothes back on, I'll pay a visit. The admission brought two strange thoughts back to the front of his mind, and to other parts of him as well. Firstly, that Toru was actually naked. Secondly, that he'd inadvertently caused her some harm. Stopping to look at her, then realizing he couldn't very well appraise the state of an invisible person, he muffled out. Oh SHT, your leg. Are you walking, okay? She started, but the bright tone she had been speaking with, her natural enthusiasm, wavered with a shaky breath and she confessed. It does hurt a bit. But, sorry. He groaned, before offering his left side and saying. Lean on me, okay? Thanks. Toru shined, whereupon Ken felt a thin shoulder lean itself carefully against him, one small hand grabbing around his upper arm. It's no problem. The invisible girl still waved his concern away. It's easy to miss because. There was a beat of silence as they hobbled on, until Toru laughed suddenly and added. Oh. I'm gesturing at myself, and my invisibleness. Got it. He nodded with a chuckle, before joking. I promise I won't grab your melons again. Oh my god. She cried with a giggle. If you do, I'll kick you so hard that you won't even know what hit you. It was halfway down the street that Ken felt her tug on his arm and speak. Can we stop here? I stashed my clothes inside this building. Helping her over to the nearest doorway, Ken felt her detach from him, her voice moving inside and out of sight. Well, geographically out of sight. Wait there please. A rather short amount of time passed, before she re-emerged. Tada! Toru declared, gingerly but theatrically stepping out from behind the grey concrete doorframe. Clad in a white and grey gym uniform, the effect of her entire body being invisible but still able to wear clothes was certainly something to get used to looking at. For example, looking reflexively at her chest he could see through the unbuttoned top of her jacket the inside lining of the garment. Beyond that she also wore white gloves, evidently to give her more range of expression. Which she demonstrated fully by flicking the brim of his hat with a finger, before wrapping one arm around his again. Why the whole style anyway? The hat, shades, and scarf I mean. Now able to better approximate the position of her face, thanks in part to a pair of white hair clips she had placed to frame the edges of an invisible fringe, Ken stumbled over an answer. Oh, it's a quirk thing. Don't tell me you're invisible too. She gasped, though there was no genuine belief in her voice. Two quirks were never identical. Bobbing his head from side to side, Ken essayed his response. My quirk has an aspect to it that I can affect. The less that people can see of me. The truth was quite grim in that the less people realized he was injured, the longer he seemed to be able to persist beyond the reasonable limits of the human body. Punctured lungs, displaced spine, massive BLD loss. Through all these things and more Kenny had discovered that the level of observation upon him affected his quirk's outer limits. It wasn't just that he couldn't die, it's that people didn't remember him dying, that he respawned seemingly at random sometime after death, that he could carry on well past the point where other people would have collapsed. All this of course he couldn't exactly tell Toru, unless he wanted the cute bubbly girl to think he was fully crazy. Cool. Her answer was predictably uncertain, but by this time they had reached the gathering of students about the medical tents. It also happened that Kenny had noticed something which drew his immediate attention and pulled from him a tired sigh. What the F? Leaning across him Toru stared in the same direction, beholding two stretchers that bore upon them two examinees. One was the spiky-haired blonde who had shouted at him and his three friends on the bus, and the other was one of those friends. Walking over, Kenny looked down on Seataman, covered in sooty burn marks, hair frazzled and wild from overuse of his quirk. He looked like someone had applied 1,000,000 volts to him, while also setting off a kiloton of TNT in his face. Despite this he was still conscious, and as Ken looked his old friend in the eye and spoke. Dude, you look like SHT. Seataman could only respond with disoriented grumbling. His wounded neighbor did not fare any better, and both of them seemed to be mumbling the same sort of thing. Disconnected swear words, mixed in with groans of weak and DMN. Friend of yours? Toru asked from his side, her voice skeptical. Yeah. Kenny admitted to his chagrin. You could say that. Sunlight streamed in through the window, as Izuku, along with his mother Inko, sat in their lounge. It had been a matter of seconds since she had flustered into the room, waving her hands and holding an envelope addressed from UA. After they had both calmed down enough to open up the letter, they had spent another few seconds examining the strange flat metal circle that had slipped out. Not waiting for his nerves to get the better of him, Izuku had hit the button on the side. "I am here." He immediately regretted it. The flat disc fired up with a blast of fanfare music and a familiar voice shouting out a familiar catchphrase. From the object's center a beam of light had risen, quickly widening and projecting a holographic figure onto the coffee table. As a hologram. The glowing miniature All Might was a sight for sore eyes, so much so that Izuku began to weep on the spot. It felt like so long since he'd heard from his hero, that he had convinced himself that everything was over. That he disappointed Yagi so much that the man would never want to see him ever again. "I know it's been a while, but I've been very busy." The small speakers made All Might's booming voice buzz and flicker a little bit, like his natural volume was clipping the upper end of the recording hardware. However, the fact that he was seeing the man at all gave way to the confusion at seeing him here, like this. "I'll get to why later, but for now let us go over your UE entrance exam scores." Thumbing the side of his nose conspiratorially, All Might puffed up his chest even more and sprang into a speech. "You passed the written exam, your hero essays in particular setting you apart as someone with a, super crazy in-depth, almost fanatical knowledge of heroism. Very impressive, if a little creepy." The compliments were heartwarming and relieving for him, but Izuku wished that Yagi-sensei could have made it through without awkwardly laughing and glancing off to the side. "Anyway. You unfortunately scored 0 villain points during the practical portion of the exam." All at once he started to regret letting his mother see the results with him. He'd been anticipating the rejection, but even so, it hurt so much that he couldn't even bear to look at her. "With your written scores we would be happy to offer you a place on the general education track at UA." He heard a pleased noise from Inko and felt a warm reassuring hand touch him on the shoulder. Still, Izuku could hardly register it. The sound of his failure ringing in his ears. "And you can certainly accept that place." All Might paused, a long, drawn-out, painful, theatrical beat. "If you choose to deny your position on the hero course, that is." Izuku fell over sideways, even as a holographic thumbs up jutted out at him. He felt like he'd literally been punched. Clutching at his heart, his mother's excited shriek ringing in his ears, Izuku mumbled out some garbled, shocked words. "I can't take this suspense." "Indeed." His idol boomed, seeming to have predicted Izuku's response down to the millisecond. "If we scored applicants based solely on villain points, why, we would miss out a great deal of what makes a hero." He blinked his teary green eyes, staring into the glowing holographic ones of All Might. "This is where hero points come in. Points awarded based on your willingness to help others, and you, young Midoriya, ran into danger without a second's thought, used your quirk when it was most needed, and saved the life of a fellow examinee." He found himself parroting words back at the projection, unable to fully process the information, but two in particular kept forming in his mind. Hero points. Because of your bravery and valor, the judges awarded you 60 hero points. The hologram switched to show a section of leaderboard, with 4 columns marked by name, villain points, hero points, and finally total score. There was his name, below a Chaku Torikan and above a Emagarin Bata. All Might's voice continued to play, a cheeky winking tone present, knowing the man Izuku could picture the elbow-jabbing sideways look he would be giving the camera. "I wasn't one of those judges either, so you know your score is the real deal. Not only did the judges recognize your worth as a hero, but so did a certain examinee." The view changed again, switching to a recording of that girl from the exam, the one with the gravity quirk who had saved him twice in one day. "That kid with the green scraggly hair?" she asked someone off-screen, footage appearing to have been captured from a security camera. "I don't really know how to describe him, he was kind of plain. But he saved my life, and I don't think he scored many points in the exam otherwise, so, if it's possible, could I give him some of my points? If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't even have finished the exam." The projection cut back to All Might once again, the man standing there in his bright blue costume, the Y-like symbol on its chest standing out a bright white and becoming larger than life. despite the whole ensemble currently being small enough to fit on their coffee table. So, with your exemplary score, you placed 10th in the rankings of students. Therefore, we here at UA are happy to offer you a place on the hero course. Izuku. His mother's arms crushed around him, and he hugged her back, babbling incoherently as the recorded message played on. That's right, you did hear me correctly. For indeed I am here. Teaching at UA for the upcoming semester. Wait, what? He practically screamed, flying off the couch to kneel in front of the hologram, looking the tiny symbol of peace right in the face, trying to discern any hint of joking or deception. Izuku was close enough to see the wrinkle in the corner of All Might's eyes as he warmly said. See you in September, Midoriya. Plus, Ultra. Then finally, just before the hologram zapped off, Yagi looked askance and asked someone. So how many more of these are there? Butters gazed at the holographic display with watery eyes, for what must have been the 50th time tonight. He had made it, but that feeling of victory and validation was polluted by something else. He had scored a total of 59 villain points, quite high and easily enough to place him in the course. However, the existence of heretofore unheard of hero points was sitting in his stomach like a concrete butterfly. He had 0 of those. The points which measured how much you had helped others, had aided your fellow examinees and averted potential disasters. In that obviously important category, he had scored nothing. His value to the school came solely from his ability to destroy. Scrubbing through the recording the device had shown forth, Butters paused at the short snapshot showing his placement. 11th place. Just below him in 12th, was an Asa Aka, with 41 villain and 17 hero points. On the lower end of hero points overall, but compared to him far and away the better, more altruistic person. Above him, however, was his complete opposite, someone who had managed to accrue 60 hero points and around intimidating 0 villain points. This person, this Midoriya Izuku, was so incredible, so undeniably amazing, to have passed with flying colors on the basis of his heroic nature alone. What kind of person were they? What kind of quirk did they have? How could Butters hope to stand alongside such a person in any respect? He looked out his window at the drizzly twilight street, mountainside Sasupaku having grown quite long before the sun began to set. His shoulders sagged, he wouldn't be going out into that crisp slush and dreary thin air for a few days yet. Considering the weather, some might have considered it a good thing. Not Butters, any chance to get out of the house and away from his parents would be a welcome one. His father had grounded him, of course. Sitting in the lounge together, the three of them had watched the holographic projection as it first played out. His mother and father sat side by side as he himself knelt before the coffee table as if it were some kind of shrine. Once the miniature light form of Present Mike had announced his acceptance and more importantly explained the point system, his father had been outraged. What kind of hero can't even earn 1 hero point? Even by accident. The answer was sitting alone in his room, looking outside at the rain with longing in his eyes. It's to be expected, Itsuka-chan. Kendo Morihei stood, feet bare, on the tatami mat that Itsuka herself currently lay on. Switching her hands beneath her, she pushed her body back up, taking a neutral stance across from her grandfather. Worry played on her face as the anxieties about her entrance exam score had weighed on her. Of course, she had been overjoyed, once the holographic projector had shown her success. Once Midnight had explained the obscured scoring method, and Kendo's family had filled her head with congratulations. It was an impressive result, a great deal of hero points, 3rd highest out of all examinees. Yet as the days kept passing by, her days at school slowly becoming awash with both excitement and melancholy, Kendo had felt doubts plaguing her. If she hadn't failed herself during the exam, if she hadn't overextended her quirk, how much better would she have done? Her villain points, in comparison to most of the other top 10 examinees, were paltry. Barring one outlier with, of all things, 0 villain points, the big-handed warrior was roughly 10 points behind the other top 10 participants. It made her think about what else was holding her back, in the exam had she been playing it safe, avoiding the 3-point robots. If it hadn't been for that last-minute rescue she had made at the end, would she have made it in? Those doubts were crushed and swept aside by her family and friends, but even so they remained. It had led to her asking her grandfather to push her training regimen in the dojo, which in turn had led to her falling flat on her peach repeatedly for the last 2 hours. Contrary to her family name, she did not practice kendo, neither as it happened did the kendo family. Their dojo taught specifically aikido, a martial practice focused on soft takedowns that kept both parties as uninjured as possible. An excellent form for a hero, where safety was always a concern. Still, no matter how softly you are thrown, when you're put on the mat 30 times in a row you start to feel the sting. I just feel like I could have done better. She managed to reply, voice catching as she wrestled the emotions in her down to the metaphorical tatami mat. Life is growth. The uneven and crackling voice of her grandfather assured. Part of that is always looking back on where we were, comparing it to our present. You are at a point in your life where you will always look back and ask, could I have done better? Myself. I am at a point in my life where I look back and ask, why am I not as good as I was? His hairless face but bushy eyebrows stared at her impassively. We both need to listen to that inner voice, the voice of the fighter that lives in our hara. The voice of growth, the voice of Aikido. He smiled, a warm but deeply thoughtful expression on his wrinkled face. Then we can forget about the future, and focus on the now. What are you doing now? You're telling me to forget all my anxieties, Ojizen. She groused back, shoulders slumping out of her ready stance. That's kind of hard to do. I know. He nodded in understanding. Like I said, I have nervous thoughts that come from the same place. He too relaxed his stance, the bright light of the otherwise empty dojo washing all around them. But dealing with them is not something that can be done instantly, so notice in yourself when those anxieties cannot be handled in the span of a single training session. She could grasp the lesson he was giving her, no one could improve instantaneously, so why worry about that? As long as she was trying, making improvements every day, then she was growing. I think I'm going to take a break, Gigi. She smiled, an expression he mirrored. Sitting at the side of the room, her bare heels cold against the wooden floor, Itsuka distracted herself from those incessant thoughts of self-improvement by taking out her phone. Flicking over to a new group chat that had recently been blowing up, she found the excited chatter of her fellow examinees in the chat which Jimiai had called Battle Center Pals. Where it pleased her to see that the last one of them to receive their response from UA, Heidi, had been accepted into the hero course. The distraction proved an instant success, as Kendo put into the chat, where all of them were excitedly babbling about how they would all be reunited and might even be put into the same class. With a beaming smile, Itsuka tapped away at the screen, oblivious to her grandfather's watchful eye, as he too bore a smile at seeing his most dear student so happy. Up next is Kurosarita Ken, from Nozono Middle in Tokyo. Principal Nizu continued, moving on to the next student as ranked by the villain point total. It was a vital process, Aizawa knew, and one that demanded rigorous attention to detail since they were effectively choosing a future generation of heroes. That didn't make it any less dull, however. Hours of combing over every single examinee, none of whom they could dismiss out of hand, as he expected would be proven later with a certain student. But before they discussed that particular anomaly, seriously, how did a kid with a quirk that strong score 0 villain points? They had to work through the rest in the normal way. The work consisted of appraising examinees with the highest villain point total first, analyzing and attributing any hero points that they warranted. Followed up by addressing any outlying factors. Outlying factors they had mentioned thus far included things like temper, abrasiveness, cooperation, come to think of it anything that fell under personality. Then, after deliberating the sum total of both hero and villain points, they would move on to the next student and do the whole thing again. It was not here that the classes would be decided, no, Nizu took that task upon himself for some unknown reason. Sure, any teacher could offer alternatives, but the mammalian principle remained the final arbiter. Realizing he'd been drifting off to sleep, Aizawa screwed his eyes shut and forced them back open. Shifting a lock of long dark hair out of his face, he focused in on what Ishiyama was saying, not the most villain points, but from what I can tell, one of the most well-trained combatants we've seen so far. The literally stone-faced Cementosa's voice was as steady and flat as ever. The afternoon sun shining through the floor-to-ceiling windows smacked a big blocky shadow onto the table, Ishiyama's metamorphic head shape carving out his place at the table. Joining them were the rest of UA's main faculty, barring their 2 new teachers, both of whom had been exempted from this arduous task so that they might continue to prepare their syllabus. Squinting tired eyes against the brightly lit room, his colleague's comment made him pay attention to the video playing out before the assembled staff. "He kinda reminds me of you, dude," Hizashi quipped, leaning over to jab him in the ribs with an insistent elbow. The eyebrows of his old friend and colleague were waggling in amusement. Long ago Aizawa had come to terms with the fact that Hizashi's present mic persona was just his real personality. Eyeing at the footage, the Erasure hero couldn't help but admit that Mike had a point. The boy was merciless in his search for villain bots. Even his martial form was familiar, not dissimilar to his own in fact. Glancing at the readout, Aizawa hid a small smile behind his scarf. 40 villain points. That's above the usual upper limit for someone without an applicable quirk. How many did you get in your entrance exam, Shota? Midnight did not hide her smile, though it was a smirk born less out of anticipation and more out of teasing. From beneath her dark bangs, he could see her permanently lascivious eyes twinkling. As a married man and longtime colleague of the R18 hero, he knew better than to misconstrue her behavior as flirting. Like Hizashi, she seemed to have adhered to her hero persona somewhat irreversibly, though her prognosis was nowhere near as terminal as present Mix was. At least she didn't blow out his eardrums. His expression flat, he answered back, giving nothing away. I passed. Leaning heavily on the conference table and leveling her with a blank stare, Aizawa Shota was the picture of uncaring stoicism. Come to think of it, was he as warped by his hero persona as the others were? Worth a thought. Outfit him with some support gear and he'll go far. Power Loader mused, the head of their support department having taken off his usually ever-present helmet. The stylized Digger Scoop sat on the conference table, as if he was waiting for someone to compliment the rather esoteric modern art he had brought along. Is he using his quirk? Aizawa questioned, scrutinizing the wall-projected footage even further. I took the liberty of printing this out. Nizu inserted with a deliberate pause, dramatically producing a small stack of papers, about 5 or 6 in total. What's that? Chewing on one of the many different chocolatey snacks he'd brought along, the rotund chef leant in, eyes squinting at the papers. Mr. Blimp piped up, having been the one to hand their boss the bundle at the opportune moment. With nothing more than an uncomfortable adjustment of his giant spectacles, their school counselor said. It's his quirk counseling documents. M.K. At the revelation that such a collection was said document, all staff turned their eyes on Maki, blank disbelieving faces to the last. Most quirk counseling bureaucracy filled out 1 sheet, maybe 2 if things were especially complicated. Elementary and middle school quirk assessment was not a very in-depth part of the Japanese educational system. It was something Shota had railed against when he had the occasion to drink. It's quite interesting. Cackling, his shrill laugh biting at their ears, Nizu span in his chair like a violently mischievous child. Summarizing, Maki elaborated. The consensus is that he doesn't have one. He's quirkless. Snipe queried, the man having rarely piped up until now. It was at this point that the gun hero chose to remove his mask as well, giving up to the ever-growing feeling of a long night as it drew in. Bristling mustache freed from its confines, he placed the gas mask on the table next to their construction ornament. He shows the medical signs of having a quirk, MK. But it's never been proven what it actually is. Maki looked down at the table, a despondent expression growing on his face. He says, or, rather he's claimed in the past, to be immortal. Nizu yelled at the top of his tiny lungs, throwing his clawed little paws up in the air with exuberant delight. Chunibyo nonsense. Shota couldn't help but scoff. He's very consistent in his claims. Nizu practically purred, ceasing his spin to level them all with a glinting beady-eyed stare. With the timbre of a villain laying out a despotic plan for world domination, their fearless leader continued, white fur bristling. Yearly quirk counseling sessions at his elementary school, always the same thing. Middle school he stops going, like most kids. Since they're optional and all. I took the liberty of glancing through the reports. Several times he's quoted as saying, "I've died 1,000 times, but no one ever remembers." Very intriguing. K. We'll have to set something up once he starts. Maki hummed, making a note on his already overfull note paper. He easily makes enough villain points for acceptance, then we have this. Pointing back at the screen, the principal drew their attention to an extended display of teamwork between Kurosarita and someone. Nizu, anticipating this confusion, hit a button on his computer, whereupon the footage flickered into infrared, another body outlined by the heat vision. They work well as a team, skills and quirk complemented each other. Cementos interjected once the video had been playing for a few seconds, again, a hum of appreciation in his tone. Points for that, additional for medium threat level. That's Hagakure Turu. Maki supplied after searching his files, more of a formality to lodge the name in their collective mind for later judging. With an approving nod, the big-headed counselor indicated the invisible girl's limping form moving around the outside of the battle area. She's injured here as well, MK. Very determined performance. Look at that Krav Maga insanity. Mike yelled, hands chopping the air with excitement, as Kurosarita performed a leaping spin into the guard of a three-pointer. Taido. Aizawa had corrected before he could stop himself. Seeing his old friend's confused expression, he sighed and explained. Martial art that focuses on acrobatics, brutal takedowns, and getting inside an enemy's attacks. The beginner explanation would have to do, but still, the grasp of the art this Kurosarita had was something to be acknowledged. Even if he had delusions about his quirk, his skills and determination were plain to see. Right, given this, how many hero points are we looking at? Midnight asked, and with that the rest of their assessment continued on, coffee being poured, snacks delivered, and minds numbed by the repetitive work. A buzz from his pocket caused Aizawa to draw out his phone. Upon the screen the first few lines of a text stared up at him. How did she do? XX, laughing face. With a smile of a different tone than his characteristic grimace, Shota deliberated his response before quickly unlocking his phone and typing back. Can't say yet. The following reply was swift and predictable. No. So, mean. Don't keep me in suspense. Glancing back up to interject in the continuing discussions, he soon fired off another response. Haven't gotten to mark her yet, so couldn't tell you, even if I was allowed to assess her. The next response came in the form of a photograph. Two round laughing faces looking into the camera, both sticking out their tongues in exaggerated mockery of him. Two heads of green hair, one seafoam the other ashen. Used to be that particular brand of teasing would annoy him to no end. Now it made each day just a little more bearable. Was that Stockholm Syndrome, he often wondered. Then he looked at those smiling faces again and knew that even if it was, he didn't mind. Side by side the resemblances still shook him. He was descending into wan happiness, when a dreaded sound forced Shota to practically destroy his phone with how hard he locked the screen. Daw! So cute! Hizashi bellowed from right beside him, where the spiky-haired voice hero had been snooping over his shoulder. Midoriya hadn't been able to stop himself. Late one night, smile still on his face from the good news, he had brought up the UA website. The results of the entrance exam were made public, at least those who had made it into the course. So right now, Izuku was reading down the list of names and faces who he would be studying alongside. It was curiosity, maybe only slightly creepy. Still, he was consumed by wonder. Would any of the people he saw on the day have made it in? What kind of scores did everyone else get? The page shone out at him in the dark of his room, the plain white of the screen causing him to wince. Hachikage Sutamu, villain points, 55, hero points, 21, total, 76. His quirk was called DIY Touch. Tactile Industrial Technokinesis, Izuku couldn't help but analyze. One hand idly scratching out his musings in a new notebook. Such a perfect quirk for the exam. With decent hero points as well, a natural fit for the top of the results. Kirishima Ijiro, villain points, 39, hero points, 35, total, 74. Quirk, hardening. A stone-like body alteration quirk, perfect for up-close combat, able to take a lot of damage. That must have made the exam a lot more fun with the reduced threat of injury. Uraraka Achiko, villain points, 38, hero points, 45, total, 73. Izuku couldn't wipe the stupid grin that was splitting his face, his eyes sparkled as he took in the small profile picture of the girl who had saved him, who had come forward to offer to give him some of her own points. She was so wonderful, he kept thinking, as his eyes lingered on her exam breakdown a little longer than the others. Kankyaku Jimiai, villain points, 34, hero points, 35, total, 69. Direct route, a speed quirk, not dissimilar to that engine-legged guy. The one who'd shouted at him in the orientation, and who Izuku had spent the rest of his exam trying to avoid. Midoriya spent a long few seconds considering how two speed quirks might differ, their conditions and drawbacks. Would this student have used the same kick-focused approach to combat as that tall, rather scary examinee? Ibra Shiozaki, villain points, 36, hero points, 32, total, 68. Vine. The name of the quirk didn't give him much, but from the look of her hair this examinee had a plant control power. Could she be similar in some way to Kamui Woods, he thought, mind traveling back to the time or two he'd seen the hero in action. It was at this point in his reading, that Midoriya was struck by a thought. Eyes going wide, he scoured the list of soon-to-be students until he found the name he was searching for. Its place in the second-to-last spot shocked him maybe even more than his own acceptance. Just below a Minoru Mineta and just above a Katomon Bulrog, there he was. Unbelievably. Bakugou Katsuki, villain points 37, hero points, 0, total, 37. What the hell had happened? With the school day promising to begin in an hour or so, Ken made his way through the crowd of umbrellas and deeper into the urban sprawl. Decidedly not in the direction of Nozono Middle School, where he was supposed to be a student. April showers fell all over Tokyo, and while he would have loved nothing more than to sit and study for exams he wouldn't even have to take, Ken had other things on his mind. Every other Monday he would skip the first few classes, taking the detentions and reprimands in stride, all so he could make one perfunctory visit. It wasn't even something he enjoyed doing, it had become more of a duty. The mob of school kids taking the train was massive, a torrent of uniforms, their wave broken up by an occasional adult or outstanding metamorph. Even as the salaryman morning rush worked in concert with the school rush, the uniformed middle and high schoolers dominated their own carriages on trains. An unspoken divide between old and young. Ken disentangled himself from the herd at Shimbashi, long since having left the route to Nozono, and even the Sanya lines behind. As he walked through the cold and the mist, the crowds thinned, the landscape changing from that of officious businessmen and chattering school kids to something decidedly different. Ken stepped to the side as a forklift whizzed by, crates of fish stacked on its two prongs. Up ahead he could hear the shouts of fishermen and dock workers, an auctioneer patter of prices and weights. Tsukiji Fish Market, at this early hour, became something feverish. One of the busiest fishing ports in the world, and not somewhere you'd expect to see a middle schooler. Which made Ken stand out as he moved through the aisles of crates, having transitioned from the outside rain to the interior freeze without even realizing it. The rain had been exchanged for a high-ceilinged warehouse, where the smell was rancid, as heaps of shrimp, octopi, trout, squid, clams, mussels, and all manner of unidentifiable sea life lay dead on pallets. Ignoring the sidelong glances he got from the laborers, Ken scanned the crowd for a familiar figure. The main thoroughfare of the market, at this time of morning, was nearly impossible to parse. Right now, workers stood on top of huge tuna fish, extolling the virtues of their specimen to a small gathering of cooks and restaurateurs. They called it tuna hell. Frankly, he could see why. The wet eyes of death that stared out from the massive fish, numbers daubed on their sides in red marker. No doubt asking themselves what sin they had committed in their life to have deserved this fate. A few minutes of searching and Ken found his own quarry, because he sure as hell wasn't here for the fish. Yo! K-Bin. He threw out the casual greeting as he approached his brother through the bitter cold. Kurosarita K-Bin was standing against a mountain of crates. Both hands in the pockets of his dark jacket, collar pulled up to fend off the chill, he looked nothing less than shady. His unkempt brown hair was tangled atop his head but kept short around the sides, and the numerous blemishes and scars on his unpleasant face completed the look. Kenny. The elder Kurosarita retorted, annoyance plain in his voice once he recognized who had called his name. I told you not to come around here, stupid. Am I not allowed to come check up on my Onizen? Ken grinned beneath his hood, eyes twinkling with mockery. Not when he keeps telling you to F off. K-Bin shot back with a roll of the eyes. Not angry, just done with the conversation that hadn't even begun yet. I got this. Ken ignored the slight, taking a paper bag from within his coat and slinging it over to his brother. Inside was a still warm breakfast wrap he'd snagged from a hole-in-the-wall place on his way here. Nothing fancy, but then again, that was practically their family motto. Yeah. K-Bin responded reluctantly, the one word taking the place of a thanks which might have left the mouth of any sibling from any normal family. The acknowledgement still contained some of the intention that a word of appreciation might have had, however, and that was all they had ever been able to manage. Stuffing his hands in his pockets again, Ken abruptly uttered a phrase he'd spoken to his brother many mornings before. So, you should come see Karen more often. Listing his head carelessly to the side, K-Bin was about to respond before Ken cut him off. Since I got into UA and everything. K-Bin looked at him dubiously. Oh. Was all he could manage. Yeah. The two of them locked eyes for a second. I'll be moving to Shizuoka in September. So, she won't have anyone. I thought I would be able to commute, but, it's too far, too expensive as well. I don't have the time. K-Bin said after a few seconds of silence. A silence that only existed between them, the shouts of fishermen flying through the air around them, along with the clatter and crash of crates and industrial machinery. You know I should be in school right now. I found the time. Ken shot back, a twinge of irritation coloring his voice. Yeah. You miss school, the F are they going to do? K-Bin answered, anger rising in his tone. I'm doing important SHT, right? Ken looked around, making sure to highlight the action for his brother's sake. Sure. He dragged the word out sarcastically. This looks like real important SHT. Shut up, Kenny. I send you two some money, that's F enough, right? K-Bin creased his brow, giving his younger sibling the stink eye. Ken's older brother employed a certain verbal tic, whenever he was feeling put out, he inflected the word right at the end of questions. The implicit meaning of the word becoming an indicator that the conversation was going to be over if you didn't get the picture. Accompanying it, the twitching eyebrow, involuntarily raised, could make him look quite threatening. Ken had the advantage of being K-Bin's little brother, however, and therefore immune to such things. Sighing, the younger Kurosarita had to admit. We appreciate it. His tone becoming once more serious, he said. We do. Still, Karen needs more than that. Before he could answer, K-Bin's phone started to ring, a shrill factory-setting ringtone chiming out from within his shabby jeans. Taking the device out, his brother spared him one last look before leaving. Whatever. Stay out of trouble. Then Kabin lifted the phone to his ear and vanished off into the stacks of dead fish. Ken did not follow. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Faff on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.